H. Most people think family is a safety net, but mine was a trapdoor waiting to spring. H. The timeline of my displacement was brutal and efficient. H. My parents kicked me out of my room because my sister and her kids wanted to move in. H. Stay in the basement for now, my father demanded. Then they hiked my rent to $1,400. H. So I planned my exit and watched them lose their minds. It started on a Tuesday. H. The specific Tuesday I stopped being a son and became a target. H. I walked through the front door, still coated in a fine layer of cardboard dust from the factory. My hands were raw from 12 hours of breaking down pallets, and I smelled like industrial adhesive and sweat. H. I wanted a hot shower and 8 hours of coma, like sleep. Instead, the H. I found Vince and Donna sitting at the kitchen table with matching expressions of performative concern. It was the specific look they saved for when they needed to rebrand a catastrophe as a family favor. My father didn't waste time with pleasantries or questions about my day. He simply pointed at the empty chair opposite him, H, signaling the arraignment had begun. He explained that Kara was losing her apartment again, a recurring season in our family drama. H. She needed stability, he said, which apparently meant she needed my bedroom. The logic was watertight in his mind. She had 2 children and anxiety. I had a grueling factory job and a quiet resilience they decided to exploit. My mother chimed in with her soothing, negotiator voice to soften the blow. H. She promised the basement would be cozy once we moved some boxes around. H. She conveniently forgot to mention the space flooded every time it rained hard. The floor drain backed up with sewage twice a year. H. And the furnace rattled like a dying engine. They weren't offering me a living space. H. They were offering me a storage unit that smelled of mildew. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline that never came. Then came the financial audit that shattered my composure. Vince leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, H, and dropped the rent hike. He claimed that with 4 extra people in the house, utilities would skyrocket. H. He wanted $1,400 a month for a damp corner of a concrete dungeon. I did the math instantly in my head. H. Between tuition and my car, that number would bankrupt me in 6 weeks. H. They were demanding cash that simply did not exist in my bank account. I could have screamed or flipped the table. H. But I saw the stubborn set of his jaw. Arguing would only give them ammunition to call me ungrateful or selfish. Instead, H. A cold clarity washed over me, silencing my rage. I stood up, picked up my bag, and looked him in the eye. I told him I understood completely. I walked to my room, not to pack for the basement, H, but to calculate the precise logistics of a ghost exit. I descended the stairs into the basement, H, my phone flashlight cutting through the gloom. The air grew heavier with every step, thick with the scent of damp concrete and neglect. H. My father called this a renovation, but I saw only a hazard. Spiders had claimed the corners. H. Weaving complex empires undisturbed by human hands. The floor drain was surrounded by a dark halo of dried muck. H. This was the dungeon they valued at an executive price. The furniture situation was even more insulting than the atmosphere. H. In the corner sat a futon my parents had bought during the Bush administration. I pressed a hand against the cushion, and it crunched. H. A support leg was bent inward, meaning anyone sleeping there would roll toward the center. H. A slow drip from a pipe overhead tapped a rhythm against a plastic bucket. They weren't just displacing me. H. They were charging me a premium to suffer. I retreated to my bedroom for the last time, but sleep was impossible. I sat in the dark. H. Staring at my laptop screen as I ran the numbers again. My tuition was due in 3 weeks, and my car insurance was rising. Paying their extortion fees would drain my savings to zero within 2 months. I realized then that this wasn't just unfair. H. It was predatory. They viewed me as a resource to be harvested until empty. At 4 in the morning, H. Desperation finally outweighed my pride. I scrolled my contacts until I landed on Elias. H. We worked the same shifts and had survived the same terrible supervisors, but asking for help felt like defeat. H. I typed out a message explaining the rent hike in the basement, expecting him to be asleep. H. My thumb hovered over the send button for a long minute. I pressed it before I could talk myself out of the lifeline. The screen lit up instantly, blinding me. Elias simply sent an address for a 20. For our diner near the highway and a time. H. 6 sharp. I packed a bag with enough clothes for a few days, hiding it deep in my closet behind my coats. H. I needed to move in shadows now. When I crept out to my car, the house was silent. H. I rolled the car down the driveway in neutral to keep the silence unbroken. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and grease, a comforting change from the mildew of home. Elias was already in a booth, looking as tired as I felt. He didn't offer pity or useless platitudes when I sat down. He just slid a set of keys across the table. H. He explained the layout of his apartment and the parking situation. He treated my escape like a tactical operation. H. Suggesting backup routes to avoid my parents' driving patterns. I started to thank him, but he held up a hand to stop me. He admitted his brother had bailed on the lease, leaving him drowning in rent he couldn't cover alone. He didn't just need a friend. H. He needed a roommate to keep a roof over his own head. The dynamic shifted instantly from charity to partnership. H. We shook hands over cold eggs. We didn't just plan a move, we planned a disappearance in plain sight. H. I needed to sell the lie that I was living in a swamp. I set the stage with care, arranging empty soda cans and laundry on the concrete. H. I dragged the broken futon into different positions to mimic usage. I even poured water into the sink to keep the trap from drying out. H. The basement had to look inhabited, not abandoned. H. It was a theater set designed for an audience of 2 who never actually bothered to come down the stairs. H. My days became a blur of logistical gymnastics. I finished my shift at the factory, drove to Elias's apartment, H, and collapsed onto a real mattress for 5 hours. Then the alarm blared at 4:30 in the morning. H. I drove back to my parents' house before the sun rose, parking in the driveway while the engine was still cold. H. I entered through the side door like a burglar. I was exhausted, but the adrenaline of the deception kept my eyes wide open. H. The real challenge was moving my life out one backpack at a time. I couldn't carry boxes without raising questions, so I improvised. H. Heavy textbooks went into my gym bag. On Mondays, Collectibles and electronics were smuggled out inside folded hoodies on Wednesdays. I disassembled my gaming PC component by component, leaving the empty case on the desk as a decoy. My room upstairs slowly hollowed out. It was becoming a shell, just like my relationship with the people living downstairs. One Thursday, my mother almost caught me during an extraction. I was sliding vinyl records into a tote bag when the floorboards creaked overhead. Her footsteps paused at the top of the stairs, heavy and hesitant. I froze, holding my breath until my lungs burned. She called out my name, but I didn't answer. After a long moment, she walked away, muttering about laundry. I realized then that my silence was just as easily ignored by her as my voice. While I vanished by degrees, Kara arrived like a Category 5 hurricane. She moved in with enough luggage to colonize a small country. Her boxes blocked the hallways, and her children turned the living room into a war zone of plastic toys. My parents catered to her every whim, cooking special meals I wasn't invited to eat. I watched from the periphery. A silent observer to their chaotic reunion. They were so busy welcoming her, they simply didn't see me leaving. 2 weeks passed without me eating a single meal at that table. I showered in the upstairs bathroom every morning to leave wet towels as evidence. I squeezed toothpaste onto the sink rim and left the toilet seat up. I crafted a perfect illusion of a messy present sun. Yet, nobody asked how the basement was treating me. Nobody asked why I was never around for dinner. My absence was just as invisible to them as my presence had always been. The final test of my camouflage came on a Sunday. I sat in the kitchen for 10 minutes, drinking coffee while my father read the paper. He didn't look up once. I realized I could have walked out with a television under my arm, and he wouldn't have blinked. I stood up, rinsed my mug, and walked out to my car. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, and strangely, I had never felt more alive. The silence I had carefully curated in my ghost life was shattered by the reality of the occupation upstairs. My nephew, Braxton, didn't just play. He laid siege to the living room with acoustic violence. He threw plastic trucks against the hardwood floors until the finish chipped, while Kara sat on the couch, scrolling through Instagram. She called it free-range parenting, but I recognized it as simple neglect. The noise was a physical weight. Pressing against the thin door of the basement, I pretended to occupy. The first casualty was my mother's porcelain vase, a relic from her own grandmother. Paisley knocked it off the hallway table while chasing the cat with a stick. When the crash echoed through the house, I waited for the scolding. Instead, Donna swept up the shards and apologized to the child for putting a breakable object in her path. The vase was blamed for its own fragility. It was a masterclass in deflection, proving that in this house, accountability was strictly for the son. In the past, I would have been the one on my knees with a dustpan, ensuring no stray shard could hurt a barefoot child. Now, I simply stepped over the debris on my way to the fridge. I watched the chaos unfold with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. My lack of intervention went unnoticed because they expected me to be invisible. I was no longer the fixer. I was a witness collecting data on the implosion of their domestic bliss. The grocery bill doubled. H. Yet the refrigerator remained perpetually empty of anything edible. Kara claimed she was saving for a deposit on a new place. H. But packages from online boutiques arrived daily. While she unboxed designer athleisure wear in the living room, Vince cornered me by the garage. The H. He reminded me that the first of the month was approaching and emphasized that the 1400 was non-negotiable. H. He spoke about fair shares while his daughter lived for free and treated the house like a hotel. Down in the basement, H. The neglect was becoming biological. The damp patch in the corner had bloomed into a fuzzy H. black colony of mold that climbed the drywall. The smell was sharp and metallic, like old pennies and wet dog. H. I didn't scrub it away or buy bleach. I took my phone out and snapped a high-resolution photo. The etch. Then I recorded a video of the water dripping from the rusted pipe, narrating the date and time in a whisper. That photo triggered a shift in my strategy. I realized that my silence wasn't just a shield, it could be a sword. I began documenting the upstairs destruction with the same rigor. I photographed the crayon murals Paisley drew on the dining room walls. I recorded audio of Braxton screaming for 20 minutes because his nuggets were the wrong shape. H. My camera roll filled up with evidence of their incompetence. I wasn't just surviving their madness anymore. I was building a case file. H. By the end of the month, my parents looked 10 years older. Donna had dark circles under her eyes from scrubbing stains. H. and Vince hid in his workshop to escape the noise. They were hostages in their own home. H. enslaved by their refusal to set boundaries with their golden child. I felt a strange flicker of pity, but I snuffed it out instantly. Shh. They thought they were tolerant grandparents. The camera roll on my phone proved they were enablers to a tyrant. Shh. I arrived for my evening performance to find the stage wrecked. The door to my bedroom, which I had installed a heavy duty knob lock on, stood ajar. The wood around the striker plate was splintered, a testament to violent, childish persistence. My stomach dropped, not with fear, but with a heavy, sickening anticipation. I walked into the room that was supposed to be a shrine to my absence. It looked like a crime scene. Drawers were pulled out, papers scattered like confetti. Braxton sat in the center of the bed, H. cross-legged and oblivious to the violation. In his hands was the one thing I hadn't moved to Elias's apartment yet. H. It was my grandfather's field watch, a battered Hamilton from the 60s with a cracked leather strap. H. It was the only tangible thing the old man had left me. Braxton was using a metal nail file to pry the back casing off. He looked up, H. his eyes wide and innocent, and smiled at me. I wanted to see the gears, he announced proudly. I stepped forward, my boots crunching on something small and metallic. The crystal face was shattered, a spider web of glass obscuring the dial. H. Tiny springs and cogs, the heartbeat of the watch, lay scattered across the quilt like dead insects. He had gutted it. I didn't yell. I didn't grab him. I just stared at the ruin of the only object in this house that held any love for me. H. The silence was apparently too loud. Kara appeared in the doorway within seconds, her radar for trouble uncannily sharp. H. She didn't look at the destruction or the splintered door frame. She looked at me, towering over her son, H, and instantly flipped the script. "Why are you looking at him like that?" she snapped, scooping Braxton up. "He's just curious, Joel." H. "He's 8. You can't leave expensive toys around and then get mad when kids play with them." The audacity took my breath away. "H, he broke a lock to get in here," I said, my voice dangerously level. "And that wasn't a toy." H. "It was Grandpa's watch." Kara rolled her eyes, clutching the boy who was now forcing out fake tears. H. "It was old junk anyway," she scoffed, turning to leave. "Stop being so dramatic." H. "You always care more about your things than your family. Maybe if you were actually around, you could have supervised him." My mother appeared in the hall, drawn by the commotion. She took in the scene. The broken door, H. The scattered watch parts, the weeping grandchild. She looked at me and sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "Joel." H. "Please," she whispered. "Don't make a scene. We can't handle any more stress right now." That was the moment the last tether snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet, final release. I wasn't their son anymore. I was just another source of stress. I didn't argue. H. I didn't demand an apology they were incapable of giving. I walked to the bed and swept the broken pieces of the watch into a Ziploc bag I found in the desk. I put the bag in my pocket. H. Feeling the jagged glass through the denim. I looked at the empty room, now truly stripped of everything that mattered. H. I didn't feel sad about the loss. I felt a cold, vibrating excitement for the crash that was coming. The invitation came via text. H. A summons to celebrate Kara's new part-time retail job. I almost didn't go, but the curiosity was a physical itch I needed to scratch. I wanted to see the delusion up close one last time. The dining room was a sensory assault of clinking silverware and Braxton's shrill demands for ketchup. H. My mother had roasted a chicken that looked dry enough to choke on, yet she presented it like a peace offering. I sat in my usual spot. H. The invisible ghost at the feast, watching them play happy family. Kara held court at the head of the table. H. Detailing her 10-hour work week as if she were running a Fortune 500 company. She complained about her feet, her manager, and H. The customers, while my parents nodded in sympathetic rhythm. Paisley flicked peas at me across the centerpiece. H. giggling when they landed in my water glass. Nobody corrected her. Vince poured wine for Kara and soda for me. H. Making a pointed joke about needing to stay sharp for the factory. They were celebrating a minimum wage job while ignoring the engineer they had displaced. The plates were cleared. The H. But the tension remained thick and suffocating like humidity before a storm. I saw the look pass between my parents. Shh. The subtle nod that signaled the real agenda was starting. Vince cleared his throat. H. A sound that used to make me flinch but now just bored me. He clasped his hands on the table. Leaning forward with that practiced look of patriarchal seriousness. He started talking about responsibility and the rising cost of groceries. I set my napkin down, aligning the edges with the table, H, and waited for the inevitable hit. Then came the number, delivered with the confidence of a man who believed he was owed the world. H. Vince said I was 2 months behind on my contribution to the household expenses. He did the math out loud for me. H, tallying 1,400 for last month and 1,400 for this one. That was $2,800 they expected me to write a check for right now. He framed it as an investment in Kara's future. H, a necessary sacrifice to help her get back on her feet. The sheer, unadulterated greed of it made me blink. I looked at Kara, who was studiously examining her fingernails to avoid eye contact. I looked at my mother, whose hopeful smile was starting to waver at the edges. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. H, a dark and jagged sound that stopped the conversation dead. It wasn't a happy laugh. H, it was the sound of a pressure valve finally blowing. Vince slammed his hand on the table. H, demanding to know what was funny about family obligations. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a screech that silenced the room.
What's funny?
I said, my voice steady and cold. H, is that you think I live here. The confusion on their faces was genuine, a testament to their absolute blindness. The H, I told them the truth plainly. I told them the basement had been empty for 7 weeks. I told them the bed hadn't been slept in. H, the shower hadn't been used, and the food hadn't been eaten. I watched the information hit them like physical blows. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The silence stretched heavy and accusing. Vince was the first to recover. H, his face turning a mottled, angry red. He called me a liar, pointing a shaking finger toward the driveway. Shh, he shouted, that my car was there every single morning and evening. I nodded, smiling at the trap he had just walked into. You saw the car? I said. But did you ever see me? Did you ever knock on the basement door? Did you ever ask why I wasn't at dinner? The realization washed over him. He hadn't noticed his son was missing, H, only that his vehicle was present. Kara tried to salvage the narrative, sensing the attention shifting away from her. H, she accused me of being dramatic and trying to ruin her big night with my selfishness. I turned on her, and for the first time, H, she actually flinched. I told her that her celebration was funded by parents who were trying to extort their college student son. H, I pointed out the empty chair I'd left at this table for weeks, a void she was too self-absorbed to notice. H, the victim card she tried to play disintegrated under the weight of the facts. H, I didn't wait for their rebuttals or their inevitable guilt trips. I walked to the door, feeling lighter with every step. H, as if gravity had loosened its grip. My mother called my name, her voice cracking with the first real emotion I'd heard in years. I didn't turn back. I walked out to my car, the one they thought proved I was theirs, and started the engine. H, as I reversed out of the driveway, I saw them standing in the window, a tableau of regret. They finally saw me. H, but only because I was leaving. The drive to Elias's apartment was a blur of adrenaline and vibrating plastic. H, my phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat, lighting up the dark cab like a strobe light. H, 47 messages accumulated in the 20-minute drive, each one a desperate claw trying to drag me back. H, I didn't touch the screen. I just let it dance against the upholstery. A manic reminder of the chaos I had finally escaped. H, when I parked, I took a deep breath of cool night air. The silence outside felt heavy, final, and incredibly sweet. H, I sat on Elias's couch and finally read the digital autopsy of the evening. My mother's texts were paragraphs of weeping guilt. H. Asking how I could embarrass the family so publicly. H. Vince demanded I return immediately to apologize for disrespecting him in his own house. Kara claimed I had traumatized Braxton by yelling and ruining her special night. They were rewriting history in real time. H. Casting me as the villain in their tragedy. I didn't reply to a single one. I simply took a screenshot of the entire thread. H. Elias handed me a slice of pepperoni pizza and a beer, his version of a Medal of Honor. He didn't ask for details yet. He just nodded at the laptop I had pulled from my bag. We had discussed the nuclear option weeks ago. But tonight was the first time it felt necessary. You sure you want to push the button? He asked, popping the tab on his soda. H. Once you send this, there is no going back for Thanksgiving? I opened the laptop lid. I am not going back anyway, I said. Ch. I opened the folder I had innocuously named School Projects. Inside lay the dossier of their negligence. H. Meticulously organized by date. There were the high-resolution photos of the black mold climbing the basement drywall like a cancer. H. There was the video of the sewage backing up from the drain, complete with my whispered narration of the date. H. And there were the photos of the smashed watch, the shattered crystal glinting under the flash. H. Ch. It was a gallery of horrors that proved exactly what kind of home they provided. The financial records were the cold, hard spine of the report. I had downloaded 2 years of bank statements, highlighting every rent payment I had made while a student. H. I contrasted this with a spreadsheet of Kara's loans. Thousands of dollars they claimed they didn't have when I needed textbook money. H. The math was brutal and undeniable. It painted a clear picture of a son who paid his way and a daughter who drained the reserves. H. Facts didn't care about their excuses. I converted the entire file into a single PDF. I addressed the email to Great-Aunt Marlene. H. The iron-willed matriarch of our extended clan. She controlled the family estate and had zero tolerance for laziness or fools. H. My parents had spent decades currying favor with her, terrified of being written out of her substantial will. H. They presented themselves as the struggling, noble caretakers of the family. My dossier was about to shatter that illusion permanently. H. I wasn't just exposing them, I was hitting them in the only place that actually hurt them their future inheritance. I wrote a brief, H. respectful cover letter explaining that I thought she should know why I was no longer residing at the family home. H. I didn't whine or ask for pity. H. I simply stated that the attached evidence explained my departure and the destruction of the heirloom watch she had given my grandfather. My finger hovered over the enter key for a heartbeat. Sending this was an act of war. A bridge burned beyond repair. I pressed the key. The swoosh sound of the sent email filled the quiet room. The fallout arrived 3 days later, via the neighborhood gossip network. H. Garrett, my coworker, told me his cousin heard screaming coming from my parents' house on Tuesday afternoon. Apparently, Marlene had called them for a chat. She didn't yell. Etch. She reportedly used the disappointed schoolteacher voice that terrified grown men. She stripped away their narrative of the dutiful parents and exposed them as negligent enablers. H. They had been undressed by the one person whose opinion determined their financial future. The panic in the house was apparently absolute. Suddenly, the tone of my parents' messages shifted from anger to desperate. H. Cloying affection. Vince texted to suggest we talk things out like men over a steak dinner. Donna sent photos of us from my childhood. H. Caption with heart emojis and pleased to come home. They weren't missing their son. H. They were missing the leverage they needed to get back in Marlene's good graces. H. They needed me to tell her it was all a misunderstanding. I read their begging texts with dry eyes and deleted them without responding. The final twist came in a heavy cream envelope that arrived at Elias's apartment a week later. I hadn't given Marlene this address, H, which meant she had resources I didn't know about. H. Inside was a check for $500 and a handwritten note in elegant cursive. It didn't mention my parents or the drama. It simply said, for the watch repair. Buy a good lock for your new door. She had rewritten the terms of the game, H, and for the first time, the odds were in my favor. Living with Elias was a culture shock in the best way. The apartment wasn't huge, H, but bills were split evenly and respect was mutual. When the dishwasher broke, we didn't scream or assign blame, H. We just watched a tutorial and fixed it. It was a revelation to realize a home didn't require walking on eggshells, H. I stopped hoarding food in my room and finally unpacked, H. The constant anxiety that had defined my existence for 19 years simply evaporated into the quiet air, H. 6 months of silence from my parents felt less like punishment and more like a vacation. H. I used the check from Aunt Marlene to have the Hamilton Field watch restored. The watchmaker replaced the crystal and cleaned the movement, making it tick with a steady, reliable heartbeat. It sat on my wrist now, a heavy reminder that things could be broken and put back together stronger. H. I was working extra shifts and saving for a future that didn't rely on their conditional approval. H. The past tried to claw its way back on a rainy Tuesday. I walked out of the factory to find my mother leaning against her sedan, looking small and misplaced. She held 2 cups of coffee, shielding them from the drizzle. The receptionist must have tipped her off. H. A breach of privacy I would handle later. Seeing her didn't spark the old guilt or fear. It just made me tired. I walked over, H, not to reunite, but to ensure she understood she wasn't welcome here. She straightened up, H, forcing a hopeful smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I brought you a laddie," she said, extending a cup like a peace treaty. "Caramel. H, how you like it." She spoke fast, stumbling over rehearsed lines about missing me and the house feeling empty. She claimed they wanted to fix things. It was a performance, a desperate attempt to patch a sinking ship. H, she wanted the compliant son back to balance the books, not the person standing in front of her. I didn't take the cup. "You want to fix it?" I asked, hands in my pockets. "Then admit it. Admit you treated me differently than Kara for 19 years. Admit I was just the backup plan." Her smile faltered, replaced by defensiveness. She opened her mouth to offer an excuse, H, but nothing came out. The silence stretched between us, heavy and absolute. H. She couldn't say the words because she couldn't face the reality. That silence was the only answer I needed to hear. Go home, Mom, I said softly. I stepped around her and headed toward the break area, leaving her alone in the rain with 2 cooling coffees. She didn't call after me. I walked inside and handed the lat to Garrett, who looked at me with raised eyebrows. The H, free drink, I muttered. I realized then that I hadn't lost a family. I had simply stopped auditioning for one. Blood might be thicker than water, but it can also drown you if you let it.